Carolyn Pierce, and I live in Hyannis. Growing up in the town was an amazing, amazing thing. It was very close-knit. Everybody knew everybody. A lot of people went to my church, the Federated Church, or they were in the Catholic Church. But we were all great friends. We could walk wherever in the town of Hyannis without any fears. We would go out at 9 o'clock in the morning, ride our bikes wherever we want, and 5 o'clock at night we'd be back in and having dinner. And parents didn't have to worry back then, which was an amazing, amazing way to grow up. I can't say that that's the way now, but it was then. I graduated in 1962, and in high school I was involved first with cheerleading, and then I went over to field hockey. But I was very involved in the music program with Simon Gesson and in voice. And he was a great influence in my life. I know that may sound funny, but he guided me from the time I was in the children's choir at the church right through high school. He made sure that I tried out for sectionals and state music festivals, of which I made all of them, and he guided me into college, where I was on the traveling concert choir at my college. So he was a big influence to me. He was very special to me. I can remember driving all the way to Pittsfield, Massachusetts with Simon Gesson, he and I, because I was the only person that made the state chorus, and it was in Pittsfield, and he was one of the directors of that. And then we had it here after I got out of college. Cy brought it here to Hyannis, and I was involved with him in all of the housing that went on for all of the musicians and choral members. There were like 700 kids here, and I think we had it at the Hyannis Theater, because that was the only place that sat over 1,000 people. And so he was a big influence for me. Yeah, and then when I got home from college, I was in the choir with him. And when he left, so did I. The fit just wasn't there anymore for me, because this man had been in my musical life from the time I was probably 7, every year of my life, except the 4 years I was away at school. So he was the guy that influenced me a lot. Now that's a funny story. And it goes back to the Cape Cod Melody Tent. And I worked there for many, many years, as you know. And in order for me to be free in the summer, I needed a job that gave me my summers off. And so when I went to college, there was no way I was going to teach school. I was raised in a family that owned Cookies Kindergarten, and teaching just wasn't on my goal list. So when I got back and went into all these management positions at the theater, of which I loved that work, the smartest thing for me to do was go back to Bridgewater, pick up the teaching credits I needed, which I did, and teach school. And as soon as I got them, Walter Wani hired me to take over Ed Dodigan's job when he got sick. I was there the whole year from October, which was my practice teaching. And then John Linehan said, I want you down at the middle school. And that was how I got into teaching. But it gave me my summers off. Well, you got to go back to when I started at the Melody Tent, which was at the ripe old age of 5. when they first opened, when Gertie Lawrence and Richard Aldrich opened the theater under, it was Cape Cod Music Circus then, on Main Street. And my mother had a kindergarten. So whenever they needed children, because this is back before you had to have professional children, they called my mother. And so my mother would take a bunch of kids over, and they, you know, went through the audition, and I was there. And the show was Annie, Get Your Gun. Well, Annie has a bunch of children, little brothers and sisters. And I was just sitting in the chair, and the director said, "Who's that little blonde girl over there?" And she said, "Oh, that's my daughter. You know." He said, "No, I want her up here." So that was my very first introduction to the Cape Cod Melody Tent. Then my goal in life was to be an usher at the Melody Tent when I was 12. Because you had to wait till you were 12, because you worked 2 hours, you got $1 a night. Oh, it was wonderful pay. And so I got that job because my family got very friendly with the Holtzmans, David and Sandra Holtzman, who bought the theater from Richard and Gertrude. He was Gertrude's attorney. That's where the connection came in. So we, at 12, David said, yes, I could have the job, and I had it. So then my goal in life was to be the head usher. That was it. You know, I wanted to get $2 a night instead of $1. So from the age of 12 to my mid-30s, almost 40, I was at the Melody Tent. And as I grew up, I took other positions. And David's nephew was Eddie Lutz from Lutz & Carr, accounting firm in New York City. He found out I was an accounting major in college. So he said, okay, we're going to put you through all of the managerial jobs. And it took 5 years, and I did the secretary. That was one job. They said, you're not a good secretary. And I said, I know that, but you know. Then it was box office, running the box office, then back in assistant manager, and then managing director. So that's my history at the Melody Tent. Bill bought it in the winter of 1978, and I had taken sort of a leave of absence. They called me in when they needed me because I had very young children at the time. And so I sort of took a leave of absence for like 3 years. And when they needed me, I went in. And when Bill bought the theater, he then called me and said, I want you to come back and manage the theater because you know what you're doing. I'm having fun here. I just like doing this. And so that's when I went back full time. Kids were older, could do it. And so that's, and then in 1981, I left because Bill stopped all of the shows. But through the years, the Melody Tent first did their own shows. They had a resident company, and they brought in the stars. We built sets, we built costumes, we did all that. That got to be too expensive. So then we went into a 3-theater corporation with Cohasset, North Shore Music Circus, and us. It was a corporation called Playhouse Productions, Inc. And we built the sets, North Shore built the costumes, and Cohasset's plant is actually too small. So they did some other things, and they paid for the trucks to move things and stuff like that. And that lasted all through the 70s. All through the 60s and early 70s. And that was pretty amazing. And I can remember Chapman we would shut down a show on Saturday night and bring up a show on Monday night. And Chappie would drive the scenery, the props. He did the whole swing from Hyannis to Beverly to Cohasset, back to Hyannis, and get them all unloaded and get shows ready to go on Monday. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And we had a big apprentice staff that, and probably 15 or 16 apprentices were there. No pay, just learning theater. Yeah, I had a staff of about, well, you know, with the shows in, could go up as high as 70. With the orchestra and the shows, and then just our regular running the theater staff. Not the top ones. The, like the lighting designers and stuff like that, they came out of New York, and stage managers. But yes, a lot of them, the regular people like Mike Princey was grounds when I was there. Yeah, and he and I, we joke about it now. And he worked with Chappie. He helped Chappie keep the grounds up. Yeah. So yes, we did have a lot of, we had several. And then there's the years that Liza Minnelli was there as an apprentice. Oh yeah, there were a lot of pretty famous people that were apprentices there. It was one of the bigger theaters in the country. Well, my sister Phoebe, my mother believed in early education for children. And when Phoebe was 4 or 5, there was nothing in Hyannis for nursery school or play school or anything. And she used to have to drive her to Centerville. And it's right on the road going to Osterville. I know the house. And so she was kind of frustrated with that. So when I was 2 or 3, I would have been 2, she decided to open Cookies kindergarten. And she talked to my dad, and Dad says, well, you know, and this was at our house on Norris Street, where I live now. And she started it in the dining room of that house with 7 kids. The next year, she had to move it to the living room, which was a much bigger room, because at that point, I think there were 17 or 18 kids. And with that, but after the first year, she made, I don't know, $500 or something for the whole year. And so she said to my dad, what do I do with it? He said, go buy yourself a fur coat, you deserve it. My dad was a big jokester anyway. But anyway, so after that second or third year, it really got very tight. So they put an addition on the house on Norris Street. They connected the garage with the house. It was like a breezeway, and it was much bigger. And she could have 2 like separate rooms, but yet there was a long, wide hallway between the 2. So she could stand here and see both rooms, because she wanted to separate the kindergarten from the nursery, the 5-year-olds from the 4-year-olds. And she hired her best friend. Actually, the first person, no, she hired her best friend, Dottie Dolan, lived on Gosnell Street. All the Dolans grew up here. And then, no, that's, yeah. She hired Dottie, and she took a walk. They took a walk through the woods with the kids one beautiful fall day. And there was a house on C Street, sits way back off the street, and it had a huge backyard. In fact, it had a backyard, it had a grove, and then a backyard behind that. And probably 2 acres of land, approximately. And big house, walk out basement, walked right out onto ground level. And so she went home because she knew who owned it. A man by the name of Earl Eldridge owned it. His father had built it. Earl Eldridge was one of my dad's best friends in Barnstable High School when they were in high school. And so she said, and this was like October, she said, Joe, go ask Earl if he wants to sell the house. because she knew that there was maybe some money issues there, because part of it had never been finished. So he goes, he asks, and we moved in the day before Christmas. They bought that house. So we moved in. The Norris Street house was turned into rental property until my husband and I got married and we bought it from my parents. And that's why we're back there. But anyway, so Cookies then grew to, I would say, probably 60 kids, because the basement was huge. And it walked out, and we had the playground behind it and the whole 9 yards. But then the Office for Children came in with a lot of regulations and things. And so we moved the kindergarten to my grandparents' house on Cedar Street. That house is no longer there, but and put a big addition on that. And at that point, the school probably grew to about 70. And it ran for 48 years. Yeah. And after my mother died, a gal by the name of Jean Rocket ran it for us, because Phoebe and I, we weren't really kindergarten. That she was elementary school and I was more high school. And so we wanted to get back to what we did. And so Jean ran it for a while. Then she passed away, and that's when we kind of closed it. But it also evolved into daycare, and the morning still was a school that was a teaching school. But then you had the extended daycare. My mother only ran from 9 to 12. And back then, we picked the kids up and dropped them off every day. We went from Centerville to Bass River. We had 4 or 5, 6 cars on the road. But that's pre-seat belts and all of the regulations that you have today, which I'm not saying is bad, because you have to have them. But we didn't have that many cars on the road. The infrastructure was adequate then, which it's not now. And so that's the story of Cookies and how it started. Uncle Warren was my father's brother, and he was he fought in World War II. He married a woman by the name of Fern Skinner, who was the organist at the Federated Church. I mean, this gets really inbred here. And he worked for the post office, delivering mail, but he was instrumental in all of the parks in this town, in the town of Barnstable. He was on the Park and Rec Commission forever, and his passion was to develop these little parks with stones, with people that were in the town, and remembering important people in the town. And he worked endlessly for the Park Commission, the Park and Rec Commission. And I can remember going with him at times to the different parks over in Cotuit, and here in Hyannis and Centerville. And so when Veterans was put together, Veterans Beach, and he had died. He had died in his early 60s. The town put a memorial at Veterans Beach for him. And that's what that stone is down on Veterans Beach. And through the years, it got all covered up with trees and this and that and the other thing. But I know we're trying to put that back together, and the stone is back there. So that's very, I'm very pleased with that. Mr. Connor was terroristic. He was very short, but boy, you knew when he was coming. And he ran a very, very tight ship, and I can't say that that was bad. Just as John Linehan did, some of John's ways were a little different, but I enjoyed working for John, as well as in going to school with Mr. Connor, but I can remember the boys were like, uh-oh, here he comes. And he was in the halls most of the time. But a very well-respected guy in town, very well-respected. But he was, yeah, if he were coming, boy, you did what you were supposed to do. Not as free living as it is today. Did a lot of studying, I guess. Had a lot of friends, did a lot of things, did a lot big social life. Our house, because of that great big cellar, ended up being the party house. Phoebe's in my house and Bonnie and Billy Dow's house. One week it was at their house at the basketball games, and the next week the parties were at my house. And everybody would come. The school only had maybe 500 kids in it at the time. So everybody knew everybody. We were all big friends. And, you know, we had a gym teacher named Kay Nahubian, and her whole thing was in the fall you did field hockey, in the winter you did basketball, and in the summer you did softball, and nothing else. So unless you were any good at softball or basketball, of which I'm not tall enough to be good at basketball, you know, as far as being in sports, that wasn't there for us. And those were the only girls' sports that were available, other than cheerleading. But the other thing I did was the Kennedy Rink opened when I was 14, 15, my freshman year maybe. I became very involved in figure skating. And
that's how it all started.
That's how it all started. It was that I can remember Cookie Cogshaw. I can remember being there on New Year's Eve, because where's a 15-year-old going to go on New Year's Eve? And you like to skate. And it was snowing, and Cookie's driving the Zamboni, because of course it didn't have a roof on it. He's driving the Zamboni, and the few of us that did skate, we were out skating in the snow. And yeah, that's where the skating came in. It was with me. And again, I tell everybody, you could forget my skating. I tried very hard, but I was not great at it. Mickey Belisle was the first manager there, and he was my coach, and he was a good coach. After that first year, he moved up to Newton and opened up a studio rink. And a gal by the name of Joanne Elaine, who grew up on Cedar Street, and I used to drive, she could drive, I couldn't, drive up weekly to Mickey's rink and have our lessons because he left here. And so then when the rink, I don't know what happened to the rink, or he sold it and he moved away, I went in and skated at the Skating Club of Boston all through high school. So I was very busy doing that in the winter. So there really wasn't much that I could do. And then the very first show ever held at the Kennedy Rink, I was a member of the Cape Cod Skating Club. Joanne directed and I assistant directed. So there's the theater again coming in with me. And yeah, I've got in fact, I have a big full page picture thing of that. And Jan Cook was in the show. No relation, but lived right down the street. Jan Cook was in the show, and oh, I can't tell you the name. Rita Blair was in the show, and it was fun. I had a blast. Well, I went to Florida to college, so there weren't many rinks in the 60s in Florida. There was one in Miami, and I did skate down there a couple times, but I was 4 hours from Miami. I was in Central Florida. So when I came home, the kids were born, and Phoebe's kids were born, and they were very young, and we wanted a family activity. And at that point, the membership of the Cape Cod Skating Club was closed because there were so many people. And the Cape Cod Coliseum was being built. Carolyn Kendrick was trying to form a skating club there in the Coliseum. So I said to Phoebe, I said, why don't we go over to the Coliseum? Wendy was 5, I think. David and Peppy were 3, and Kristen was just a baby. Wendy and David are Phoebe's children. And so we went, and we joined family membership. And at that time, skating clubs had family skating time. So my husband, Dana's on the skates, and Bob's on skates, and we're on skates, and the kids are on skates. And so it was like, all right, I went on the board. Both Phoebe and I went on the board of the Yarmouth Ice Club because we loved skating. And it grew and it grew. And of course, the worst thing you can do is put your kid in to learn to skate, and some coach comes to you and says, your child has talent. And thousands of dollars later, they were very talented. Wendy, Phoebe's daughter, was a 11-time national competitor, 4-time international competitor. Peppy was nationally ranked and international skater. And while they were learning and so forth, I wanted to learn. And I kept going to judges and saying, and I would always go to the judge that had my daughter the lowest and say, what do I need to do to improve? I don't have a lot of money to waste, so I have to make sure I know what I'm doing. And it got to a point that finally one judge said to me, Carolyn, you ask all the time, why don't you become a judge and then you'll know? So that's what I did. And I did become a judge. I'm now what's called a sectional judge, goal test judge. I'm on 5 national committees in U.S. figure skating. I am national vice chair for Theater on Ice judges. And the kids just they exploded. They were so talented. Wendy is the youngest to ever win a sectional championship. She did it at 10 years old, intermediate ladies. And Wendy now is a world and Olympic judge, much higher than me, but everything she knows came from me. Not really. And Peppy, my daughter, is a coach. She doesn't coach right now because she's involved with her kids. Her daughter is a pretty high-level 12-year-old hockey player. She's on a lot of big teams. And Kristen started to skate, my youngest daughter, and we looked at each other and said, we can't afford 2 kids in this sport. So we took her over to a gym, Torian Gymnastics, which she was over on the Independence Park at the time. And she took to that like a duck to water, and stayed with that all of her career in high school and college. She was on a college scholarship to Springfield College and was captain of the team when they won the national championships. And so and then Torian was bought out by Duncan Chase, who coaches the high school gymnastics team. And when he bought it, Kristen was in the high school gymnastics at the time. He said, I'm going to keep this gym till Kristen comes home and buys it. Well, that's exactly what happened, because Kristen bought it 11 years ago, and it's thriving. It's in Hyannis, and she's doing very well with it. And 2 years ago, she was inducted into the Sports Hall of Fame at Barnstable High School. She really was the start of gymnastics being a real sport. When she was in high school, she was the only one that ever made the state championships. The team did not, but she made it every year. Her highest ranking was 7th in the state. So she, as I said, she took to the gymnastics, Peppy took to the skating, Wendy took to the skating, David was a hockey player. So we're an athletic family. and wanted our kids totally involved in something. Well, in 2011, we went to the community center and said we would like to bring the Theater on Ice championship here, both national and international. At that time, we brought, internationally, there were teams from Russia, Belgium, Spain, France, Australia. There were, there were like 35 teams between the national championship and the international. And that was the start of us taking, the Yarmouth Ice Club, taking and doing things at HYCC because it ran beautifully. The next year, I don't know whether we took that year off or not, we put in for the Eastern United States Championships. We got that. The year after that, we put in for the Adult National Championships. That was last year. This year was the National Championships for Theater on Ice. This year, we went, in 4 years, Theater on Ice has grown from those 30 teams, but you've got to remember probably 15 of those were foreign teams, to 80. We had 80 teams here. That was 1,197 skaters came in with mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, kids, and the ticket sales were, I mean, the place was packed. It got to a point that we had to take over the entire facility because of the number of people. We did that for adult nationals, and it really, we need the gym, we need all of those spaces to run these kinds of events. I never thought I'd be part of that, but I'm glad I am. I'm very proud of that. Like Elaine Zayek's going to be here next week, and she's won every medal. She was the one that introduced the triple jumps for girls. Probably Hathaway's Pond. The reason, I was a lifeguard there for years. And when we were children, my mother used to cook a meal all in one pot, and every Sunday we went to Hathaway's from the time I can remember, up on the picnic area. And then when I was old enough, my cousin, who was Uncle Warren's niece, actually, but she lived with Uncle Warren. Her name was Adrienne Skinner. She was the lifeguard there. So I went, and I went with her, and I was her assistant, like at 15 or whatever, because of course my night job was at the theater. And so I used to go with her, and I'd be there, and I'd help her teach swimming. And then I got into it, and I became an instructor, and then with John Toulis and Lisa Toulis and Joni Toulis, and we used to go to Otis to teach the kids on Saturday, during the winter at the pool at Otis, and I was the lifeguard with other people at Hathaway's, and it's really one of my favorite places. Oh, I just love the weather. The weather to me on Cape Cod is the best in the fall. I'm not a great lover of hot, and I'm not a great lover of cold, but start me at 40, bring it up to 60, 70, and take it back to 40, I'm a happy girl. So. Well, number one, the community center, the beaches, I think the school systems is a good strength. I know people sort of shudder about Barnstable High School now, but to this day, I will say, if you want a top education, you will get it at Barnstable High School. If you don't, you won't. And that's really the student's choice to make. But there are some amazing teachers there. There's amazing guidance. And all through the lower schools too, I think are very strong. So I think that's a good strength. I think the educational system. I think in Hyannis, specifically the homeless population. And the thing that bothers me is then they want to put more homeless things right here in Hyannis instead of spreading them out. Not so much homeless, but don't they want to put something down on the other end of Main Street? I think we have enough. North Street, everything is centered here. And I think we need to spread this out a little. I was told years ago that Boston gives their homeless a one-way ticket to Hyannis. I don't know how true that is, but I wouldn't put it past them. But I think our homeless people are the biggest challenge, is to find something for them. And I know right here on the Green, it's become very much a problem. And they stick together. They're not easy to deal with. And maybe because they've had such a tough life, I don't know. But I wish there was more we could do in that vein with the homeless. The other thing is the drug issue, and that's all over the town. That's not just in Hyannis. And I don't know the first way of dealing with it. I know the police are like crazy with these drug raids that are going on now, and I feel for them because I don't think that's a very safe thing to be doing. But that goes with the job, it goes with the territory. And my nephew is a policeman now in the town of Barnstable. And it's not easy. It's a tough job. Carolyn, Cook, Pierce, Hyannis.